I know some of you have experienced that. It just really softens us and makes it to be where we understand that other people depend upon us. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Seek, Go, Create. Tim Winders, your host here. And gosh, it is a beautiful day where I'm at. I hope it's a beautiful day wherever you're listening in on this. It is kind of middle of summer for me when I'm recording. The information is going to be timeless. So regardless of when you're listening, it doesn't matter. Today, we're going to be talking about what I'm titling the 3 biggest leadership mistakes or flaws. And I'll go ahead and put a disclaimer or a subtitle underneath that. This really has very little to do with leaders, but it's something that is magnified when someone's in a leadership position. So hopefully that makes some sense. I'll get to that in just a moment. We'll talk about those items, and it's going to be a fun episode, just me on mic. But I want to do a few reminders of things for those that might be just joining us for the first time or you haven't been with us for a while. We have an excellent website at seekgocreate.com where we have someone who takes all of our audio and video and they transcribe it. And then they put it in even what I call better digestible form. They put it in outline form with all the links, all the references, everything. And that's what we put in the notes section of our website. Some of you may see portions of it if you're listening on your podcast platform. And we do put a little bit of that on our YouTube channel that if you listen or watch there. However, our website, seekgocreate.com, is where we have all of those details. And here's one of the things that I really love is that let's just say that later when I talk about some specific things related to apathy as being a big mistake for leaders, if you want to go back and listen to that later, you can go to the notes section, you can scroll down to the outline where we talk about apathy, and there's a timestamp beside that. You could click on it and go right back to that section and listen to that again. I love that because how many times have you been listening in on a podcast and you go, ooh, I'd love to write that down or make note of that or find that or something like that. Well, we're working towards creating value for you that listen in so that you can go back and do that. So the outlines and the note sections and the quotes and other things that we have, resources on our page, are excellent. Make sure you go there, seekgocreate.com, and check out the notes. So with that, let's dive in today to this topic, which is I'm titling it the 3 big leadership mistakes. And I'm doing that because of this kind of, I'll be real transparent, it's kind of a cool marketing name. And really the name characteristics that you must have to be successful didn't sound as good. So I'm kind of flipping it and going to the negative. But these are character issues. These are character traits that we all should have. And if you flip it around, and that's the way I'm kind of going to teach and work with this today, is I'm going to talk about the negative or the flip side of the characteristics that we should have, so that we can kind of get it better. I think many times, I think our minds work better when we hear the negative or the opposite of what we should be doing, and it helps us learn. So that's what we're going to do today. And I want to say that this is, I think, a foundational principle here is something called moral compass. And it's really who we are as individuals and people. And I was listening to something recently, and I think it had something to do with in church world, where a lot of people are elevated to positions of leadership because of their talent. They're really good with a microphone or good on stage, or they are able to get a lot of things done. So they're put in a leadership role. Or in church world, especially in today's world, many people might be successful or talented musicians. And because they can play an instrument or sing or something like that well, they get elevated into what's perceived or what is a real leadership role, but yet they may not have some of the character or the moral compass that one needs to have when they're elevated into a role. So what I want to state here, and I wrote this out so that I got it right, we are not talking about talent here. This has nothing, almost nothing to do with someone's ability or talent. Because what we're seeing is the results of rewarding talent instead of recognizing character is what is causing many issues in the world, and specifically the world of leaders today. It is not an absolute. It's not all one and none of the other. I'm not saying that here. However, character, listen to this, it will be revealed in good times and extremely challenging situations. Let me repeat that. We will find out what people are made of when things are going extremely well. There's a lot of money coming in. There's a lot of success. There's a lot of numbers. There's a lot of growth. We'll find out what they're made of during those times, because we'll find out if their pride and ego and things like that can handle it. We will also find out what people's character is when things are tough, and when things are really tight, when money gets tight, when people are abandoning them, when they're dealing with some difficult situations. That's when we'll find out. When things are going well, sometimes we don't know, but we want to try to flush that out. That's one of the things we're going to talk about here. Talent will have much less value. It can only carry you so far when things get tough. So keep that in mind. That's one of the foundational items that we want to discuss and look at as we go through this today. I was recently reading, I'm doing a read through the Bible. I've shared that before. We're doing a chronological read through the Bible this year. And I spent some time, a few days in Ecclesiastes, and I just wrote an email on this for those people that are on our email list. You got that. And Ecclesiastes is kind of an odd, weird book in the Bible. It's either written by or about or inspired by Solomon, is what many of the theologians say. And it would not be considered positive mental attitude stuff, at least the first 10, 11 chapters of Ecclesiastes. It pretty much says that, what's the point? That's kind of my way of saying it. It's like, you're doing all this work, you're toiling, you're accumulating things, you're elevating yourself, you're getting put in roles, you've got relationships, all of this stuff's going on. And then when you die, it talks about when you die, it's all poof, it's vapor, it's wind, it's vanity, it's all of these words that they use. And it can be a little bit of depressing, even though it's very accurate. It's like real mature conversation. And anyway, I won't go over kind of the end of the story of kind of the real answer, but I do want to mention something from Ecclesiastes 10:10 that I believe applies here. It says, if the iron is blunt and one does not sharpen the edge, he must use more strength, but wisdom helps one to succeed. Let me repeat that. If the iron is blunt and one does not sharpen the edge, he must use more strength, but wisdom helps one to succeed. And I hate taking a scripture and then trying to apply it to a teaching, but boy, it screams out the applications that we're looking at in this episode that we're doing today. And this is what I hear when I read that scripture. I hear that if someone is dull, they're not operating with wisdom. I'll go ahead and add my words here. This is not in this scripture, but if they have low character, if they have some of the flaws and all that we're talking about today, they're going to have to work harder and do more to be successful. It's going to take, as it says here, it's going to use more strength. But if they've got wisdom, if they've got some of these characters that we talk about here, the characteristics, then it's going to be more helpful when we define or we look at what success is. So anyway, how about that for a lesson from Ecclesiastes here as we get started? And I wrote here, leadership and life is harder and has more issues for the low character person, or for the person with limited character. Leadership and life is harder and has more issues for the low character person. So it is our desire to have more character and to have the character traits of someone who has strength and has a sharp sword and has more wisdom. So that's our discussion that we're having today. A good leader, this is something that I just came up with recently, and this is something that's been nagging at me for a while. For those people that have been listening into some of our previous episodes, probably going back to late 2021, all the way into 2022, all of these episodes, there's just been something gnawing at me. And that is when people that are not necessarily good and kind people are elevated into roles, and we really see that it's magnified that they're not a kind and good person. And I know there's a little bit wishy-washy words, good and kind, but I feel a little strongly about that. I mean, I'm really, really tired of seeing jerks in leadership roles. We've always had them and we always will, but it's getting really annoying. So part of my mission here is to attempt to get some of us, you, others, thinking about what does it mean to be kind, to be a good person, so that it spills over into our leadership. And, it's just, I'll say it this way. And when we get to these faults or flaws that we talked about earlier, these big mistakes, it's tough for someone who's a jerk to really implement some of these positive traits. And really, jerks really will show some of these big mistakes. I mean, we can almost use that word, even though it's a kind of an odd word. And here's the big foundation, or the reason why I believe this is so important. Leaders or people are grossly unprepared for the possible, and notice I say the possible, pedestal and idolization that comes with leadership. One of the things that we're seeing so much now in our celebrity culture is that anyone who's moved into a role of being over people, or they've got somewhat of a leadership role, it's almost like the pedestals they're being placed on are beyond anything that a single person can handle. Therefore, character. That's why at the beginning we talked about extreme success. Character is so important because pride and ego typically cannot handle the celebrity or the pedestal that people that are placed on. That's why it's important for us to discuss these items so that we can avoid these flaws or mistakes. And so we've got two sides of that coin. There's one thing that I just saw here in my notes. There's the possible pedestal and idolization. And then because of the nature of social media and all that's going on, there is an incredibly, sometimes fair, oftentimes unfair, hypercriticism of the leadership role. And I just believe that average person, not pressing, not trying to work on character type issues, they can't handle it. They can't handle all of that pressure, great success, or hypercriticism. We're just not equipped to deal with it. And so we've got to continue pressing ourselves and pushing ourselves. And we got to have coaches and mentors and connection and groups and organizations where we check each other. And so it's one of the reasons why I'm doing this episode, to try to convey some of this. And this is an important foundational principle to the way I define leadership. They never control as much as everything thinks they control, including the leader very often never controls it. In other words, we do not have as much control as we think we do. And leaders that we put on a pedestal, they don't control as much as we think they do either. And there's a lot of examples we could look at, but we always put more blame on leaders than I often think that they should receive. And then we also give them more credit for some things. Many times they're just positioning things. And one of the primary things that I think a leader should do is to create an atmosphere so that not only can they succeed, but others can succeed. And related to that, like I just said, they're not responsible for all the negative situations that they're blamed for. Those two go hand in hand. To be able to handle all that a leader or a person may possibly be faced with, they must have some basic foundational characteristics. Now, some people that if you're listening in on this and you are hoping for some hardcore leadership principles, I'll just go ahead and tell you, you're about to be a little bit disappointed, but I want you to hang with me because I'm actually going to get to some practical application as we finish up or as we get deeper into this. But I'll go ahead and share with you what I believe the three foundational principles for a good person, good leader are. I've written about them in my novel. I've been meditating and thinking on these. I've been observing them in other people. I work with these when I sometimes do it subtly. I sometimes do it more out front with people that I work with in coaching roles. And the three basic characteristic traits are this: love, faith, and peace. Love, faith, and peace. And again, some of you are going, hold on a second. Now, I was hoping to get a little bit more tangible. We're about to get tangible because we're going to look at the flip side of those. But that is what I'm basing and building upon, this character of the type person, the leader, the individual that can be better equipped to handle celebrity if all of a sudden they experience growth, or the negative if they're dealing with some extreme challenges. And so love, faith, and peace, foundational items that we should have to be successful in any role, but specifically in a leadership role. Now, the flaws or the mistakes that we're going to look at here are the opposite. So let's take each one of those, love, faith, and peace, and let's flip them around. And let me tell you what I believe the opposite of those are. I believe the three big mistakes that leaders make are apathy, having a mindset of apathy, being self-focused instead of others-focused, and operating from chaos instead of rest or peace. So it's the opposite of those three: apathy, self-focus, and chaos. And we're going to go over each one of those with some specific examples so that we can be clear on what they are, at least clearer on what those things are. So let's look at big mistake that leaders make. Number one would be apathy. And this one sounds so weird to even say, because it's a word that we typically don't bring into a business setting or a leadership setting, but it's something that I really observe as being one of the biggest issues or mistakes that especially someone who's a manager, maybe a low-level manager, even upper level, that they will make. And let me tell you a practical way that I observe this. And that is, they're not on a regular basis thinking about their people and or their leaders. In other words, they're just kind of winging it, going with the flow, and they're not on a regular basis putting thought into, what can I do for Joe? What do I need to be doing for Joe right now so that he's better equipped to do the job that we are asking him to do? What can I do for Sally to help her work through the situation she's working through? She's going through some challenges, either in the work environment or outside of the work environment. As a leader, what can I do to help her through that? See, to me, apathy is ignoring it. So that's not showing love. Apathy is basically saying, you know what? They can handle it. They'll deal with it. They'll work through it. And so that's one practical item. Now, two, and these are very important, and I observe this all the time. I think back on my days working in corporate America. We're talking about way back when I first came out of Georgia Tech and I went to work for the Bell South Corporation, which has changed a good bit since then. But I think about one of the biggest flaws or mistakes that I see under this category of apathy is not giving timely praise and not giving timely correction. In other words, we have this thought that once a year, we're going to be doing a review. Hopefully there's at least one once a year, every 6 months. And so what people will do is say, you know what, I'm going to tell Sally how good she's been doing when we have our quarterly review 4 months from now. No, that is being apathetic. When someone does a good job, catch them doing it and give them verbal praise or some type of praise right then and there, because if you do not, that is not showing love and it's being apathetic. You do not want to be someone showing apathy. And on the flip side, I do believe it is showing love if you correct someone in a timely manner. Like, let's go back to Joe. Let's just say Joe just had a project and Joe didn't quite give it what we believe Joe could have given it. There were a few missed objectives. There were some things that Joe let slip through the cracks. There were some of those within his control. Some of those may not have been. If we wait 4 months, 3 months, 6 months before we correct Joe and tell him what he could have done differently, then we're being apathetic. Don't be that leader. Do not be that person. Tell Joe, say, hey, Joe, listen, we need to talk about this project that you just finished. I want to tell you, I appreciate you taking the lead on it. Appreciate all that you did. However, there are a few things that next time we may need to do them differently. So let's talk about what those are. And you need to do it timely, and it needs to be concise and to the point. That is showing love, and it's not showing apathy. So that's one. One of them that I talked about earlier, and that's just lack of kindness. Listen, I believe that we should be, especially if someone's in a leadership role, they should exude love and kindness as often as possible. And listen, I know some people are, by the book, harsh, more ruler types. That does not mean that you can't change and adjust. We talked about it earlier. Don't be a jerk. Nobody wants to work for a jerk, and no one should want to be a jerk. I hope that's not you. Please, if it is, maybe put something in the comments or send a private message. We could talk about that. So lack of kindness, don't be a jerk. Another one, as far as apathy, is focusing on the wrong things. Now, we could go through a long list of items here, but if you've got objectives for a group or organization that you're leading, but yet you're focusing on advancing your position or your role or something like that, that's focusing on the wrong things. And I think as far as time blocking and managing our time, I think when I really brought up apathy here, I should be able to look at someone's calendar. You should be able to look at my calendar and know what's important to them. If you do not have time blocked to think about and then spend time with your leaders or people that work for you, then I would say that you might be showing apathy in that area. So focusing on the wrong things. And then I was just reading actually last night from this book, M. Scott Peck. It's an older book, kind of a classic. I don't think I've ever read it, but it's called The Road Less Traveled. And some of you may have read it. If you're watching the video, I'm kind of holding it up here. And there was a quote. He was really talking about parenting, but I think it applies so much here. It just jumped out at me, and I actually highlighted it. And again, we're talking about the characteristics of love. The mistake is operating out of the opposite of love, which is apathy. And here's what he says here. When we love something, it is of value to us. And when something is of value to us, we spend time with it, time enjoying it, and time taking care of it. Good discipline requires time. And I would also say that love requires time, and apathy shows lack of time commitment. So don't be someone who makes the mistake of being apathetic when it comes to leadership or the role that you're in. Show love and commit time to the things that are important, so that you're not making that big mistake of apathy. Okay, let's move to the next one. And it is that big topic that I'm calling self-focus, which is the opposite. Now, this is going to be kind of interesting for some of you. It's the opposite of what I'm calling faith. Now, some of you are going, wait, Tim, when you talk faith, isn't that kind of religion and spiritual and all that? And then self-focus seems a little different. Let me explain. Self-focus to me is when someone is consumed with themselves. They primarily think of themselves. They think of their success, their actions, their activities, their stuff, whatever's going on with them is primarily what they think about. Someone who's operating from faith, to me, is someone who has an understanding, maybe not a total understanding, but they believe that there is something bigger in the world than just them. In other words, I'll use myself as an example here. There was probably a time where I thought that the world revolved around Tim. And then I started understanding some things from a spiritual standpoint, and it started softening me. And I started looking around at people around me and thinking, there's a bigger picture here. So to me, one of the opposite items of faith, the mistake that a leader makes, is being too or overly self-focused. In other words, thinking about yourself. There could be arrogance and other things that tie into that, but self-focus is the big mistake here. And one of the things that's important for me in this area, again, is just getting to a place where you recognize that the world does not revolve around you. And I think I might have shared this before, but I was probably pretty self-focused early on in my business career. And a few things happened that kind of softened that for me. First thing was that I got married. So I had to start thinking a little bit about my spouse, even though I would argue that many times people can get married and still be fairly self-focused. And then the next big thing that happened for me was I became a follower of Christ. I became, I kind of committed my life to being a Christian and a follower of Christ. And that opened up doors for me to really look at a bigger picture from a faith standpoint. And so that kind of helped with my bigger picture. But the big thing for me that really